in the room. I am Carrie Edinger, the Sheridan Community Land Trust Historical Program Manager. And we're here today for our Explore History program. And today is discovering Jessamine Johnson, an early photographic artist of Wyoming and Montana. So every second Tuesday of the month, we have Explore History. It is a partnership with the Hub on Smith and the Sheridan Community Land Trust. It meets at 10:30 right here in the cafe. I know we're at 11 o'clock right now, but we'll make it through the program. I wanted to introduce Tempe, and she is the granddaughter of Jessamine Johnson. Since 2007, Tempe has worked to preserve Jessamine's 34 boxes of photos, diaries, and other materials. And she will have a book published by the South Dakota Historic Society Press, either late 2022 or early 2023. Thank you, Tempe, for sharing Jessamine's photos and history with us, and also sharing your time with us. So I'm going to get started with the program, and thank you for everybody's patience today.
Am I ready to go?
You are ready to go. You are full screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, everyone, for coming to my presentation and taking time from your other activities. Let me know if you can't hear me well. I'm glad to see you and glad to be here. And glad to share this story of my grandmother, who was such a gifted photographer. So, when you view a painting or a photograph, do you ever have the urge to step inside the frame? Can you hear the mountain breeze sweep through the pines, feel the cool air on your skin, and breathe in the sharp scent of sage? When you gaze at a portrait and see the light in the person's eyes and their friendly smile, do you want to reach out and shake their hand? That's how I felt as I gazed at my grandmother Jessamine's photos when I was growing up. I was raised on a southeastern Montana cattle ranch, 52 miles north of Sheridan. Our home was full of art and artifacts. A Bill Gollings painting of a cowboy roping a wolf leaped out of its frame above my father's chair, and Frederick Remington prints of cowboys and American Indians followed me up the staircase, while Hans Kleiber's etchings of the Bighorn Mountains graced the wall of my bedroom. A Charlie Russell illustrated calendar frequently dangled by the phone in the kitchen. On the knotty pine walls, Cheyenne beaded moccasins and Crow Indian belts hung alongside my grandmother Jessamine's arresting photographs. Several of these Western artists were close family friends or acquaintances of Jessamine. All were men whose paintings and etchings sell today for thousands of dollars. As a child, I assumed my grandmother was famous. The quality and beauty of her work seemed obvious. I never questioned whether the world beyond our family and our corner of the West knew of her and her artistry. As I grew older, I was disabused of that assumption. Women's accomplishments then were less valued than men's in the same field, less recognition and pay for equally impressive output. Over time in our history, women's contributions have often been overlooked or forgotten. On a visit home in 1978, I discovered a surprising legacy from grandmother Jessamine. At her death in January, my father, Torrey, had volunteered to safeguard her extensive photography collection. Jessamine's 34 boxes of negatives and prints, including several of her old cameras, were stashed in our basement. A few summers later, my Aunt Annabelle Moody handed me what remained of her Jessamine's diaries, an amazing treasure trove. I was inspired to resurrect my grandmother's legacy. Finally, in my retirement, I had the time to scan her numerous photos from the early 1900s through the 1950s and read her letters and diaries. Every day I put on cotton gloves, opened one by one those 34 boxes, and turned on my new scanner, copied and sleeved each image in archival material, and labeled each sleeve using an acid-free pen. In the afternoons, I would read and outline her diaries and letters and copy pertinent quotes. Slowly, I uncovered the incredible story of my grandmother's life and her struggles to dedicate time to her love of photography and the joy that it brought to her life. Jessamine's photography embraced her love of ranching, local history, the animals and the environment, and her indigenous American neighbors, all living at the intersection of southeastern Montana and northeastern Wyoming. Her prodigious collection of photographs not only reveals her artistic talent, but records the enormous changes taking place during her lifespan. Her viewpoint is sensitive, accessible, and feminine. She pays attention to women's lives and subjects often overlooked by male photographers. Her love of creating images necessitated different priorities from the usual housewife and mother. For Jessamine to find time to work with her photos often required great determination, but it added a great dimension to her life. During her lifetime, she raised 7 children, assisted her husband in running 3 successive ranches, and finally from 1930 until retirement in 1943, with the help of her husband and her growing children, she managed her father Willis's dude ranch, the Sparrow Wigwam, up in the Bighorn Mountains. She was probably one of the first women managers of a dude ranch in Wyoming. Each of you may experience a painting or a photo differently. As Rebecca Solnit so gracefully said, it does what the wordless can do, invoking everything and saying nothing, inviting meaning in without committing to any particular one, giving you an open question rather than answers. So let me take you back in time to see some wonderful images that reflect the progress and development of a pioneer woman photographer of the West. So in front of you right now, you see the introduction, and I want to introduce you to the brands. In the right corner, the Sparrow brand, which was first registered in Wyoming by her great-grandfather, Willis Bradford Spear, who brought his family to Bighorn in 1860. And this brand was registered first, I think, in 1896. His sons, Willis Jr., or Willis Moses, and brother Doc, created the Sparrow Cattle Company in 1897. And it lasted till about 1915 when bad winters, and open range without, raising hay for the winter. A lot of cattle didn't survive. So ranching changed, and Jessamine took pictures and showed how that was going on. Over here on the left is the X4, and I'll talk about that soon because that was the main ranch that they ran, and that was their main brand. Down here on the left, the J Spear J. You'll see it on some of the photos. She invented this brand and the one over here on the right, and several others for the family. This, of course, is her initials, Jessamine Spear Johnson, and it's on several of her photos as well. And on the right, the TJ, that's my dad's brand for Torrey Johnson, and you'll see pictures of him and some of the area. The Sparrow came to to Jessamine's brother, another Willis Jr., and everybody called him Junior Spear. And he and Ruth ran a ranch right next to my family's out there at Kirby, Montana. Okay, so why isn't this jumping here? Okay, here we go. So I've given other presentations and often here in California where I live now, and people, they understand about Glacier National Park and Yellowstone, but they don't know about Montana and Wyoming very well. So I always show this photograph. And here's Sheridan. Here's the Bighorn Mountains and the Bighorn Canyon. Here's where the Little Bighorn Battlefield is, Hardin and Crow Agency and Billings. People do fly into Billings and then they take off and they go to Yellowstone, and they don't know about the rest of Montana, especially this area. Okay, one of the early photos of Jessamine at the X4 Ranch, and she was born in 1886 in Bighorn. And she married Will Johnson on June 6, 1906, having just graduated from Sheridan High School. October 17th to November 1932, she was co-manager with Will of the X4 Ranch in Kirby. And then they lost it. The banks called in the loans right in the middle of the Depression. But from 1930 to 43, she was manager of the Sparrow Wigwam Dude Ranch in the Bighorn Mountains. And that Dude Ranch financially saved the family during the Depression. Her mother, Belle Benton Spear, was a kind of frustrated artist, and she discovered cameras in 1897. This is her original glass plate Kodak camera, which is currently now in the Bozeman Trail Museum in Bighorn, along with her first Kodak camera with, look at the film, it's funny looking. But Belle got so excited by photography, and she taught her daughter Jessamine to assist her, and her younger sister, Jessamine's younger sister, Elsa, which many of you may be familiar with, because Elsa lived her life in Sheridan and worked with the Wyoming Historical Society and the Sheridan Historical Society, taking photos of the Bozeman Trail and Fort Phil Kearny and other historical sites. So she's still very well known in Sheridan, but Jessamine has been forgotten. So this is prior to cars. This is how the ladies got around in their wagon. This photo was taken at the Big Red Ranch, which is now the U-Cross Foundation. And Will and Jessamine leased this ranch from 1914 to 1917. And this is where they really got started well in running cattle and sheep up into the mountains in the summer. And with that lease, they were able to save money and eventually buy their first ranch, which was out at Kirby, Montana. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But at this time, in 1914 to 1917 and early into the 1920s, the cattlemen were leasing a lot of open range on the Crow and the Cheyenne, and they would go out in their wagons and help gather cattle and brand them, and often they were out in the open. So open range, this is before they built a lot of corrals. This is before the Native Americans fenced their allotments. And so these open leases, they would go out with groups of cowboys and gather cattle and brand right out in the open using a wood fire. Okay, so in 1918, I think it was. No, actually it was 1917. In the fall of 1970, actually on her birthday, and Jessamine's birthday was September 11th. So one you won't forget. They purchased this ranch and at Kirby from another company. And one of the reasons they went looking in that area, the Wolf Mountains or the Rosebud Mountains, they're called both, have plenty of creeks and springs. They have lovely valleys, which Will immediately started farming and raising hay for the cattle in winter. And so, and nearby sandstone. So they quarried the sandstone and built this amazing house. It was the first big house in the community, 3 stories, a sleeping porch for the summer, a huge basement, and open to everybody stopped as they went by. It was right on the edge of Indian Creek and the Rosebud on the main road going into Sheridan, going by Decker. And so people would always stop and have coffee and conversation, or if their car broke down, they'd stay the night. So, and Jessamine loved to entertain, and often they had parties, New Year's, Halloween, lots of excuses. And they would dance until, she talks about it in her diaries, they would dance till midnight and then have supper and then dance until daylight. And then she'd get up and go to work, and so would Will. I don't know how they did it. And along with the children that they raised. And they had 5 children at the time they moved here. And then the last 2, Vic and Brad, were born out here at the X4. So very active children, always up to fun if they could be. I love this photograph. This is my dad and his sister Eileen. They're playing in the wash tub. And here is Eileen starting to work very early, feeding bum lambs. And you can see here's the J-spear jay in the corner of that photograph. Grandmother called this the bed wagon sunrise. So for many years, until there were more fences and more branding corrals, they'd go out with the bed wagon and the cavy of horses and move around in the big open spaces, gathering for branding, weaning calves, and then trailing to the railroad. This is very likely the cook. And you can see all the bed wagons. And of course, he's got his trusty shovel. So this is prior to basic cars, and there weren't trucks. And so they had to trail their cattle to the railroad. So they would leave the ranch at Indian Creek. Right west of there, they had a big pasture. They'd gather the cattle they were going to ship, and literally they would drive them up over the Wolf Mountains and down the other side to the Little Bighorn River. And they would cross the Little Bighorn River with the cattle into pens that were right by the railroad. This is south of Lodge Grass, and there actually was a siding for the train to stop, and it was called Spear Siding. And I love this picture of them going over the top of the hills in the heavy grass of the fall and bringing the cattle on their way to the railroad. Will had started out with his brother-in-law down near Buffalo, learning all about sheep. And so he always ran sheep as well as cattle. And often the sheep were with different herders, and they were up in the Bighorns all summer long. And this photo was taken at Red Springs in the Bighorn Mountains. And this is one of her first photos that she hand tinted using oil crayons and little pots of oils. And at first, we have some of her first tries. They're rather garish, but she got so good at doing this that many other photographic artists, including one of her friends over at the Meeteetse Ranch, and his name is Charles Belden. They even have a museum for his photography. Charles would hire her to tint some of his, and I know she tinted some of Elsa's photos as well. And these enlargements, Elsa had an enlarger, which is at the Sheridan County Museum, and she would enlarge her photos and Jessamine's. So Jessamine, any excuse to get out of the house, she hated housework. None of her pictures are of the washroom, the kitchen. We have one picture of laundry. That's it. Everything is outside usually. There's beautiful pictures inside the house where the fireplace has the brand in it, and the girls' rooms with the light shining through the window, but nothing about housework. So here she is. She's brought lunch to the crew that is stacking hay. And some of the gals have come with her, obviously, so they wouldn't have to be, and she might even have one of the teachers with her. They also put up the local teacher at that big stone house. So one of the things that's interesting about this photograph is this is one of the original hay stackers, and they actually called them that, a hay stacker. And you can see the wagon here. They've taken the hay from the wagon and they lift it up and drop it down to the guys who are stacking that beautiful loaf style of haystack. Early 20s, they finally started buying automobiles. And this is a fun photo, not only because they're obviously on their way to the Roundup, and this car is loaded down with all kinds of equipment, but here is her brother, Phil Spear, standing and rolling a cigarette. And here's Junior. He's pouring water into the radiator. And you can see they're not on a regular road. And even when I grew up and I'd go riding with Aunt Ruth and Uncle Junior in the summer pasture, he would just take off across the hillsides, scaring me to death. They drove where they needed to. I don't know how they managed to not wreck everything. Okay, so one of the things that Jessamine recorded that's important historically is women leaving all the household chores and going out to actually assist the men in the ranching. And I remember my father saying at breakfast one morning, well, women at the Roundup, the old cowboys, thought that was terrifically awful. And I said, but why? Because of course, myself and my sisters were busy with the Roundup since we were tiny. And he said, well, they did swear a lot, but they didn't think it was appropriate for women to be doing men's work. Well, Jessamine's daughters and Jessamine obviously didn't pay much attention to that. And I love this photo. It's actually from 1922. And it's the Reed and Johnson girls at the Roundup. And one of the things that you must notice, we've got pantaloons, we've got riding pants, we've got divided riding pants that are more slim. And over here, this gal obviously has got to be in some sort of blue jeans, and she's wearing chaps. Now, the girls also helped to brand and break colts. They were riding astride at this point. Jessamine rode a side saddle as a teenager, and we have one photo of her on her pony. After that, she also was riding in jodhpur type pants. Here's her oldest daughter, Annabelle. Annabelle Johnson at that point, she became Annabelle Moody. And you there in the audience may know Tori and Karen Moody, who are active in the Sheridan area. And Karen operates the Mill Inn. This is Tori's mother, Annabelle. And here she is. And this is about 1925, branding a calf. And the other interesting thing about this photo, this couple right here are actually guests or dudes, which began in the early 1920s. The Sparrow Wigwam was started in 22, and Willis, her father, actually started taking in dudes right before that at his ranch in Bighorn. And Will and Jessamine followed suit. The 20s were a difficult time for ranchers and for agriculture in general. After World War I, all the young men came home, started producing even more cattle, sheep, corn, what have you. And our big market had been Europe during the war. And now all of a sudden they were raising their own food and the prices dropped dramatically. And it became a big deal to have guests to come and to sponsor lots of touristy type things, the start of rodeos and trains taking people to the national park in Yellowstone. It helped bring cash into the community, and not just for the ranchers, but of course, for the people working in Sheridan as well. Okay, so this is one of her most famous photographs. She called it Montana Roundup. She also several times called it Montana Lullaby, because what we have here is this bawling Hereford bull. And what got this started was Charles Belden again. He had taken a photograph, which he called Call of the Range. And he had superimposed a bawling bull from almost the neck up on a photograph of the mountains behind. And it was a very popular photograph. And she had seen it and she thought to herself, she wrote this down. Oh, how did you do that? A cow bawling just happened so quick, nanosecond. And so she started looking to see if she could do that. And in early October 23rd, right before the crash, 1929, up on Indian Creek, just west of the house, they're doing a roundup for the fall roundup. And she caught this imaginative photo, which really sort of captures the essence of ranching. There's your bawling bull, there's your lovely cows. You've got a whole herd in the distance with the cowboys. You've got the dust rising and the gorgeous hills in the background. So this was very popular. This travel poster you can still find today online in museums. It's in the Montana Museum in Helena. And you'll find it for sale in galleries. I actually have a copy I found in a gallery in Billings. Next. So here we are, Spiro Wigwam. So the wigwam initially was just this little round building here, like a wigwam, with a fireplace in the center and an exit for the smoke. And Willis Moses Spear, her father, first started out building this, I think it was 1922, 23, and bringing his guests up here. And of course they had tent cabins, like you'll still find in like Yosemite. And then eventually started building cabins. Now, when Jessamine came to manage in 1930, they expanded the wigwam and they built this extension right here, which is now, I think, the dining room and kitchen. And then they built literally, which is like a spearhead. So if you're up here on the hill, and there's one photo that she took up here, looking down onto the wigwam and the cabins, you can see that this is a spear. And so it's the brand in the building itself. And she and her husband and sons built this in the early 1930s, this big extension, which is there today, and added many more cabins. Dudes, wonderful pictures of dudes everywhere. This is the X4. This is Mary and Bill Birch, 1927. They've obviously been into Sheridan and bought all kinds of dress up clothes. They've got a saddle and bridle, of course, probably from Will and Jessamine's barn. But I love this photo. They have all their new gear on and beautiful hats. She's wearing jodhpur pants and boots. Lots of fun. And this photo is up. It might actually be on the edge of the dam just outside of the Spiro Wigwam. So these happy dude gals are the Omaha Women's Walking Club. And they came in 1932 and then for many successive summers. And every time they came, Jessamine dropped everything that she was doing in managing, and she led them on pack trips up in the Bighorns. And she loved taking these photos of riders on what she called the skyline, and she called them skyliners. Here's another photo not far from the Spiro Wigwam out on the open parkway when it was full of lupin. And in the background, of course, these are some of the dudes with her in the background. This mountain, they called it Spear Mountain. I don't know if they still do. Okay, so this is fun. All the pack horses weren't always on leads, and they were trained to just follow the group. And this leading rider here is actually the famous bronc rider, Patty Ryan. He took the all-around title at Pendleton and Cheyenne in 1924, and he won the bronc riding titles in the US from 1924 through 1928. But in the 1930s, he had purchased a ranch in Montana, and he also came and worked at the Spiro Wigwam and led pack trips up in the mountains, and was a favorite character of the whole family. Lakes and streams to hike and fish in, and Cliff Lake on the right. So Jessamine took many pictures of fishing. That was a very popular thing for the visitors. And this one is her artistic still life, which I just love. She cleaned the fish. There's your ceramic pan, and she's arranged them so artistically and taken this gorgeous picture. On the right, we don't have the name of the young lady standing on the cliff face there, but this is Cliff Lake up in the Bighorns. And she caught it just at a beautiful moment. The clouds are even reflected in the lake. Okay, this is crossing the ridge line between Misty Moon Lake and Lily Lake. And we've got the young wrangler in front with some of the pack horses, and here come the guests over the top of the pass. And the clouds are in the background. It's a beautiful shot. Okay. So here we have the incomparable medicine wheel. The stones on the ground correspond to the major North Polar stars over the Earth's 24,000 precessional cycle. This has been one of the ways they've been able to finally date it because of the fact, which I didn't know until I looked this up, our North Star about every 24,000 years is a different star. And the cairn pairs here also correspond to rising points of stars, Sirius, Aldebaran, and Rigel. Now, how do we know about this date? So there's a young archaeologist, she's an astroarchaeologist who has done a great deal of study of this medicine wheel. And she has discovered also that the Majorville wheel in southern Alberta, Canada, is almost an identical medicine wheel. It has the same star points. It's at a different altitude. It's a little bit different shift. And they were fortunately able to find some firewood and date it. So that particular medicine wheel is 3200 BC. What they do know is that the ancient Shoshone are very likely the ones who built these medicine wheels. Fabulous. Okay, if I can get the next one to come up. Here we go. So Jessamine, one of my friends says, Jessamine does botanicals to battlefields. And I said, yes, she does. A large, what the artist world calls oeuvre, many different subjects. So here on the left, Mariposa lilies growing wild, usually in a drier area. If you go north of the Wolf Mountains and head towards Busby and Crow Agency in the battlefield, you're dropping in altitude, you're getting to a drier area. There's lots of Mariposa lilies along Davis Creek. And on the right here, we have a twisted pine in the snow, which reminds me very much of Japanese style paintings. This is Custer's monument and his troops at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. This photo was taken in 1926 at the 50th anniversary of the battle. And there was a huge celebration. She and Elsa were both there taking photographs by the hundreds. Well, maybe not the hundreds, but many photographs. This is one of our favorites in the family and hung on the wall in our hallway. She called the trio of winners. These are Sioux. These are survivors of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. On the left, you have White Bull, who was a medicine man. And let me get exactly, he was Sans Arc Sioux. In the middle, Standing Bear, and Red Hawk on his left. They're Minneconjou Sioux. Red Hawk, right here, later was a famous artist and did paintings on skins and also in little notebooks. They had gathered for the 50th anniversary celebration, and she had hand-colored this photo also. This is also a very important historical photograph. And one of the reasons she, and also Elsa has one, I think this is the best photo of the two. They took several of these group of men. All of these men are Northern Cheyenne. They're all survivors of the Custer battle. This is 1926. So many of them had to be 15, 16 years old at the time of the battle, defending their village. We have all of the names. This is also very important because often when you look at photographs, even in the National Archives and in the Smithsonian, you'll have pictures of our Native American tribes from wherever visiting the president, et cetera. And you'll have groups of people together in the photograph, and we'll have all the names of the white men and the soldiers and whomever are there. And we'll have one or two, maybe the head chiefs that are there, and not the other names. We have all of these men's names, and I've also done research and I have stories on each one of them. My favorite and her favorite is right here. This is Laban Little Wolf. He's the nephew of the famous Chief Little Wolf who brought the Cheyenne back from Oklahoma, where they had been sent after all the Indian wars. So this is a great photo. Okay, so Jessamine visited Yellowstone in the 1920s, and there are some incredible photographs of Yellowstone Park. And some of them are rather scary because people were walking right up to the edge of some of the springs, et cetera. There were barely sidewalks at that time, little wooden sidewalks. And I've looked at several of them and thought, oh my God, what if the ground gave way? Which sometimes happens. So this is one of her later photos. She went back to Yellowstone and down into the Tetons when it had finally been added as a national park in the 50s. And this picture of Old Faithful is from 1956. And it's one of my favorites. I love it that there's a couple sitting here and it's just going off, and there isn't 5,000 people around as there are today. And this is Devil's Tower in 1916, a beautiful shot. And of course, it was called the Bear's Lodge. And there's a story about the 7 sisters that went up into the heavens and became the Big Dipper when the bear clawed at this and tried to get to them. Okay, so for the dudes and for Jessamine, Crow Encampment and Crow Fair were highlights of the summer. On the left here, this is actually, they used to have an encampment at Lodgegrass on July 4th in the 1920s, and it got superseded very quickly by Crow Fair, which started, of course, before that. So on our left is Myrtle Pretty Coos, and she is the adopted daughter of Chief Plenty Coos, who's a famous Crow chief. And what's fun about both of these photos, prior to reservation life, their clothing was made of skins, their saddles were made of bones, and they never had any of these accoutrements that you see in these pictures. This beautiful Spanish saddle with tapaderos, the silver on the bridles and the bits, the lovely Pendleton blankets. Yes, she's still wearing an elk tooth dress. That's wonderful. Look at the scarf. I found out from Mardell Plainfeather, a Crow historian, that the women, once they were on the reservation and learned about these beautiful scarves and cotton and some in silk that they could buy, it became very common to wear that when they were dressed up, as you will see here and here. Now, Mardell has helped me with several of the photos and even found photos where we didn't have names that turned out to be relatives. She was so excited. Here on the left, I have to get to my notes here. We have Una Rose Does It, and an unidentified young woman. But this is another young person that we didn't have a name for. Jessamine maybe knew her and didn't write it on the negative. So that's fun. We have some identification. Iris and Charles, baby Charles, Rising Sun. The Rising Suns lived on a small ranch just north of the X4 and not too far from Busby. And they were friends, and there's lots of pictures of the whole family and the kids. And I love her pictures of the Native American women, especially the ones that knew her and who were unafraid of having a camera having a picture taken of them in the lovely smiles. And on the right, here's Chief Laban Little Wolf with his beautiful headdress. And also, this is a scalp stick. And I have found recently that it's quite possible that this headdress, which is now in the Gary Owen Museum near the battlefield and donated by my Uncle Brad and my Uncle Bill, who inherited this beautiful headdress, was given to Jessamine because she was such a friend of the family's after Laban passed away in 1927, I think it was. And the whole family, the Little Wolf family, there's many, many pictures of them visiting at the X4. Anyway, Laban's headdress here possibly was given to him after Chief Little Wolf died. It may actually be Chief Little Wolf's original headdress. I'm still doing some research on it, but it's now in a museum and carefully protected. Crow and Cheyenne women. So on the left, Marjorie Yellowtail Steffen in her teepee. This is at Crow Fair. And on the right, one of the curators at the Little Bighorn Battlefield thinks that this is Susan Ironteeth at advanced age. And what's wonderful here is you can see the difference. Susan is totally in the native handmade garb. And here we have Marjorie. She's in a calico dress, but has the beautiful old beaded moccasins, the old fashioned headdress, and yet the beautiful calico and other blankets hanging inside the tent, and then a buffalo robe. So lots of fun to see the changes that are happening for the costuming. Here's my dad, Tori, astride Mickey, his favorite horse. After they lost the X4 ranch, there was a small ranch, a small area just due east of the X4, and it had one cabin and 2 corrals, and they kept the horses from the Spiro Wigwam there in the wintertime. Well, they built more cabins, and they built another house so they wouldn't have to live in Sheridan all the time and her father's home after the huge losses of everything during the Depression. And my dad and actually the first 2 years or 3 years that my dad and mother were married lived at the Rosebud Mountain Ranch, and they actually had built cabins for some dudes to be there, which they then took, of course, to the Crow Fair and the rodeos and up into the mountains out of the Spiro Wigwam. One afternoon in 1937, September, Jessamine went with Tori in the vicinity of that ranch and there's 12 photographs, portraits of him on horseback, and this is my favorite. And here, Riders of the Dawn. Roundup begins, the photos from 1928. In 1926, the X4 Ranch reached its largest capacity. At that point, they had 30,000 sheep and 3,700 head of cattle. And so, of course, we have quite a group of riders going out into the sunrise to start a roundup. And that's the end of my presentation.